Elvis Presley was standing backstage at NBC Studios in Burbank, California, staring at his reflection in a full-length mirror, and what he saw terrified him. The man looking back was a stranger. Gone was the young, hungry kid who had revolutionized music in the 50s. In his place stood a 33-year-old movie star who hadn't performed a real concert in 7 years, wearing a black leather suit that suddenly felt like a costume for a role he'd forgotten how to play. It was December 3rd, 1968, and in exactly 10 minutes, Elvis was supposed to walk onto that stage in front of a live audience for an NBC television special that would either resurrect his career or confirm what the critics had been saying for years, that Elvis Presley was finished, washed up, a relic from a bygone era who'd wasted his talent making forgettable beach movies, while the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and a new generation of artists had claimed the throne he'd once ruled. His hands were shaking so violently he couldn't hold them still. Sweat poured down his face, ruining the stage makeup. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears, drowning out the muffled sounds of the audience taking their seats just beyond the curtain. This wasn't supposed to happen. Elvis had performed in front of millions. He'd conquered Ed Sullivan's stage when censors only filmed him from the waist up. He'd driven teenage girls into hysteria. But that was before 7 years of Hollywood had softened him, before 27 forgettable movies had turned him into a joke. Now, standing backstage with 10 minutes until showtime, Elvis Presley was having a full-blown panic attack, and he couldn't make it stop. After his explosive arrival in 1956, Elvis had spent 2 years as the most dangerous force in American music. Then came the Army. When he returned in 1960, Colonel Tom Parker steered him into Hollywood. For 7 years, Elvis had been trapped in a golden cage, movie after movie, each more formulaic than the last: girl happy, harem scarum, clam bake. While Bob Dylan wrote poetry and the Beatles revolutionized music, Elvis sang Do the Clam in beach party movies. The critics had turned on him completely. Rolling Stone magazine treated him like an embarrassing uncle, someone to be politely acknowledged but never taken seriously. What hurt most was knowing they were right. He'd wasted years making garbage. The NBC special was supposed to change that. Steve Binder, the show's director, had fought Colonel Parker for months to create something authentic that would remind the world who Elvis really was. Elvis couldn't breathe. His chest felt like steel bands were tightening around it. His vision was tunneling. He was going to collapse and everyone would know the truth. He was a fraud who couldn't handle a simple television special. 8 minutes to showtime. Steve Binder was probably pacing. The audience was seated, cameras ready. Everything was in place except Elvis, who couldn't make his legs work. Then he heard a voice, deep, weathered, with a Memphis accent thicker than his own. "Son, you look like you're about to face a firing squad instead of an audience." Elvis turned to see an older black man in a security guard uniform. Gray hair, kind eyes. His name tag read Samuel Washington. He extended a cup of water with a steady hand. Elvis took it gratefully, hands still shaking. Samuel leaned against the door frame. "I've been working security here for 22 years, seen every kind of performer. And you know what I've learned? The only ones who get this scared are the ones who actually have something real to lose. But someone like you, someone who's actually been great, you know exactly what's at stake." Elvis finally found his voice, though it came out barely more than a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this. I haven't performed live in 7 years. What if I've lost it? What if I go out there and prove everyone right, that I'm finished?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, studying Elvis with those wise old eyes. Then he spoke again, and what he said changed everything. "You know, I was there. July 30th, 1954, at the Overton Park Shell in Memphis. You probably don't remember that show. It was before you were famous, before all this, but I was there with my nephew, and I watched you walk out on that stage scared to death, just like you are now." Elvis's head snapped up. "You were there, at Overton Park?" Samuel nodded slowly. "Front row. My nephew was 16, loved music more than anything in this world. He'd heard you on the radio, heard "That's All Right," and he begged me to take him to see you perform. I didn't want to go. I was tired, it was hot, and I didn't think some white kid singing black music was worth my time. But my nephew, he was insistent. So I went. The panic was still there, the fear still gripping Elvis's chest, but now he was listening, really listening. Samuel continued, his voice taking on the cadence of someone reliving a memory that had stayed with him for 14 years. You walked out on that stage, and I could see you were terrified. Your hands were shaking, just like they're shaking now. You started singing, "That's All Right," and your voice was trembling. But then something happened. About halfway through the song, you stopped being scared and started being yourself. Samuel's eyes were distant now, seeing that long-ago night in Memphis. You started moving, really moving, like the music was controlling your body instead of the other way around. And the crowd, they went crazy. White folks, black folks, didn't matter. Everyone recognized they were seeing something new, something real. My nephew, he turned to me with tears in his eyes and said, "Uncle Samuel, that's what freedom looks like." Elvis felt something break open in his chest, but it wasn't panic anymore. It was something else, something deeper, something that had been buried under years of fear and compromise. "What happened to your nephew?" Samuel's expression softened with old grief, the kind that never fully heals but becomes a permanent part of who you are. "Vietnam, 1965. He didn't make it home." Elvis closed his eyes, feeling the weight of that loss. "I'm sorry," Samuel nodded slowly. "Me too. But before he shipped out, you know what he told me? He said that night at Overton Park, watching you perform, was when he decided he wanted to live a life that mattered. Said you showed him that being different wasn't something to hide, it was something to celebrate. That's what you gave him. That's what you gave all of us who were there that night." 5 minutes to showtime. Elvis could hear the audience getting restless, hear Steve Binder's voice rising in panic as someone told him Elvis still wasn't ready. The sound system was testing, sending fragments of music through the walls. Outside, an entire production waited. Cameras, lights, crew members, an audience in their best clothes, all gathered to witness what would either be a triumphant return or a public execution. But for the first time in 7 years, Elvis wasn't thinking about what critics would say, wasn't worried about competing with the Beatles, wasn't concerned about protecting his image or managing his brand. He was thinking about a 16-year-old kid in Memphis who'd seen something in a scared 19-year-old singer that gave him hope. He was thinking about all the people over the years who'd told him his music had mattered to them, had changed them, had made them feel less alone. He was thinking about why he'd started singing in the first place, not for fame or money or movie contracts, but because music was the only language he had for expressing everything he felt inside. Samuel pushed himself off the doorframe and straightened his security guard uniform. "You want to know what I think? I think that kid who walked out on stage in Memphis 14 years ago is still inside you. He's been buried under all these years of movies and safe choices and other people's expectations, but he's still there. And tonight you've got a chance to let him out again." The fear was still there. Elvis could still feel his heart pounding, could still feel the weight of 7 years of failure pressing down on him. But Samuel was right. Underneath all of that, underneath the movie star and the has-been and the commodity that Colonel Parker had tried to turn him into, there was still the kid from Memphis who'd revolutionized music because he'd been too naive to know it was impossible. Elvis took a deep breath and looked at his reflection one more time. The black leather suit didn't look like a costume anymore. It looked like armor, battle gear for someone who'd been away from the war for too long and was finally ready to fight again. He turned to Samuel and extended his hand. "Thank you for reminding me." Samuel shook his hand firmly. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me after the show, if you actually go out there and be yourself instead of who everyone expects you to be." Elvis nodded. He started walking toward the stage, each step feeling more certain than the last. Behind him, Samuel called out one more time. "Hey, Elvis!" Elvis turned. "My nephew's name was Marcus. When you're out there tonight, sing one for Marcus." Elvis felt tears prick his eyes, but he was smiling now. "I'll sing them all for Marcus." The moment Elvis stepped onto that stage, something fundamental shifted. The fear didn't disappear entirely, but it transformed. Instead of paralyzing him, it energized him. Instead of making him smaller, it reminded him of what he was fighting for. The show that followed became legendary. Elvis performed with a raw intensity he hadn't shown in years. In the intimate segments, sitting in a small circle with his old friends Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana, he looked relaxed, dangerous, alive. When he performed the big production numbers, he moved with the same electric energy that had scandalized America in 1956. And when he sang the specially written finale, "If I Can Dream," his voice carried an emotional power that left the studio audience in tears. When the taping finished, Elvis walked off stage drenched in sweat, emotionally exhausted, but more alive than he'd felt in 7 years. Steve Binder was crying. The musicians were speechless. Everyone who'd witnessed what just happened knew they'd seen something special, a genuine artistic resurrection happening in real time. Elvis found Samuel in the hallway outside his dressing room. The older man was still at his security post, but his eyes were red. Samuel nodded slowly as Elvis approached. Marcus would have loved that, would have been so proud. Elvis's voice was hoarse from singing. "Thank you. For being there 14 years ago, for being here tonight, for reminding me who I was." Samuel smiled and said something that Elvis would remember for the rest of his life. "You didn't need reminding, son. You just needed permission to stop being afraid." The show aired on December 3, 1968, and 42% of the American television audience watched it, making it one of the highest-rated specials of the year. Critics who'd written Elvis off as irrelevant were forced to reconsider. Rolling Stone magazine published a review acknowledging that Elvis Presley was still a vital, important artist. More importantly, Elvis himself changed. The comeback special became a turning point, the moment when he reclaimed his artistic identity from Colonel Parker and from his own fear. Within months, he was back in the recording studio making serious music again. By July 1969, he was performing live in Las Vegas, proving night after night that he could still command a stage better than anyone alive. Years later, people would ask Elvis about the comeback special, about how he'd found the courage to walk onto that stage after 7 years away. He never told them about Samuel Washington, never mentioned the security guard who'd been at Overton Park 14 years earlier, who'd reminded him at exactly the right moment why music mattered. But every time Elvis performed after that night, just before walking on stage, he'd think about Marcus, the 16-year-old kid who'd seen freedom in a scared 19-year-old singer's performance. And he'd remember that being afraid didn't mean you were weak. It meant you understood what was at stake, and you were brave enough to risk it anyway. The 1968 comeback special saved Elvis's career. But more than that, it saved his artistic soul. It reminded him and millions of viewers that authenticity matters more than perfection, that vulnerability is stronger than invincibility, and that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is let the world see who you really are, fear and all. Samuel Washington continued working security at NBC Studios until his retirement in 1975. When he died in 1982, his family found a letter from Elvis among his possessions, written shortly after the comeback special aired. In it, Elvis thanked Samuel for giving him the courage to be himself again, and included a check for $10,000 with a note that read, "For Marcus's family, with gratitude and respect from someone who will never forget what his sacrifice meant." Today, the 1968 comeback special is considered one of the greatest performances in television history. Music historians point to it as the moment when Elvis reclaimed his throne, when he reminded the world why he'd been called the king in the first place. But for those who know the full story, it represents something deeper. It represents the moment when a man paralyzed by fear chose courage, when an artist buried under commercial expectations chose authenticity, and when a security guard who'd witnessed greatness 14 years earlier helped resurrect it one more time. Because sometimes all it takes to change everything is one person who remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. Sometimes all it takes is a voice in the darkness reminding you that the fear means you still have something worth fighting for. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, all it takes is 10 minutes before showtime and a security guard with a story about a kid named Marcus who saw freedom in a young singer's performance and carried that memory all the way to Vietnam. Elvis walked onto that stage on December 3rd, 1968, not as a movie star or a product or a carefully managed brand, but as himself, scared, vulnerable, authentic, and more powerful than he'd been in 7 years. And in doing so, he showed the world that resurrection is always possible.